All right, we'll get started here in just a few minutes. This is the June 12th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll get some people, get logged in. I'm going to do a quick audio test to make sure everything is going through okay. Just bear with me for a second. All right, just going to test the audio here. And let me just go ahead and see. I'll just go ahead and we'll just check, make sure our audio feed's going through. Okay. And then we'll get started here in a couple of minutes. So if you want to go ahead, and we're going to let people get logged in as we do this. See some familiar faces. All right, just going to check, make sure we're getting that broadcast okay. Okay, I'm just going to switch my playback really quickly here. Okay. All right, so it seems like audio is going through fine. So if you haven't been to a Club Cubase Google Hangout, my name is Greg Ondo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America as a Steinberg product specialist. So this will be kind of an interactive Q&A series. We've had some people that had submitted questions in advance, and you could send that to clubcubase@steinberg.de. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments field if you're watching this live. If you're watching this after the live portion, you could maybe skip ahead like 8 or 10 minutes. And we'll get probably by that time we'll have enough people, we'll have all the people logged in to kind of start our live stream. You could ask, how it works is you could ask questions in the comments field. We'll try to go through them chronologically. So if you get your questions in earlier, you have a better chance of getting it answered. So if you want to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. I'm Greg Undo. I'm broadcasting outside of Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you want to tell us where you're from, tell us who you are. That'd be wonderful. It's always great to see people from throughout the whole world getting logged in. And then if you want to ask questions, and if you have questions, we'll try to get through them in kind of as completely and as succinctly as possible so that we can get through as many topics. We'll try to go maybe 3 or 4 hours. We'll see how the hangout goes. Like many of you, I have my family at home during this time. So my wife is working directly above me. So you may hear her walking or on a conference call. And my son is also home at this time. So there's a strong likelihood that we'll get interrupted so that I could put on a Disney film for him. So I'll apologize in advance for any interruptions with that. But we're going to go ahead and we'll let people get logged in, and we'll have questions that start to be asked, and we'll get started here in just a few minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead and see who's on. Okay, so we have more people getting logged in. All right, so we have Kuala Lumpur where their lockdown is being lifted. That's good to hear. All right, so we have Ted Springman on. Good to see you, Ted. Okay, so we have central part of India. Okay, so just seeing, going through some of the different questions. Okay, so some more people getting logged in. All right, Magdalene Islands. Okay, so we have Fort Wayne, Indiana. I used to go there a lot pre-pandemic. All right, so Glenville, New York. All right, so we have Stanley from Poolesville, Maryland. Okay. Okay, so you see Ambient Dave. Okay, so we have a new user, Trevor. Welcome to the Hangout. All right, we have Jazz Dude that's on. Okay, so we have Coventry in the UK, France. All right, so we have Millard Brown. Okay, so we have Austin. Okay, so good to see Nick online. All right, so we have Suffolk, Virginia. Spent a lot of time down there. Okay, we have more people getting logged in. So maybe 3 or 4 minutes and we'll get started here. And if you want to send questions in advance, you could send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right. So we have Jazz Dude from Germany. It's good to see you on. He's always helpful with the discussions that go on in the comments field. Okay, so I see a question about rendering Groove Agent tracks. Okay. So, all right, so we have Seattle. Okay, so seeing some questions on transposing, getting tracks to match. Okay, so we see, all right, from OKC, I think that's Oklahoma City. All right. There's more people getting logged in. Okay, so more people still getting logged in. And we'll have the topics hopefully indexed later tonight. So this way, every question was asked, we'll have a timestamp so you could jump directly to that particular part of the video. All right, so we have Gary from Westminster, Maryland. Good to see you. I know you've been on some of the previous Hangouts as well. Not too far from me. Okay, maybe another minute and we'll get started. Okay, we have more people getting logged in. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll switch my view here so I go through some of the questions sent in. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg, question. I'm remixing an old project. The old drum set was from Groove Agent, and the new one is from the East West library. Most samples are mapped differently. How can I make them match? So let's go ahead and we'll just start a new project here. Okay, I'll just load up a quick drum pattern here. Okay, so if we have if we have drums that need to be remapped in general, this is a kind of an ideal use of the drum editor. So I'm going to make sure that we first off have a drum map, and since I'm just kind of using one of the built-in Groove Agent kits here, I could just have this automatically create a drum map from the VST3 instrument, which is a great way to go. So now when I go to, and this is assigned to a drum map, and it could be literally any drum map, we could go into our drum editor. And if we kind of slide over, and we don't necessarily see this if we open a MIDI part that's not assigned to a drum, map. But if we slide this line over, we can have what we call in notes and out notes. So if we're playing a particular project, let's say if I drag over this file directly from, and now we go to edit, let's say our drum map here, we can see that we can have in notes and out notes. So the in note is the note that's actually captured. And if we wanted this C1 to play back a different pitch, let me just select my range here. So if I wanted this, we could just choose this out note to be a different pitch. So at this point, we could just go to your out note and just change the O note value to a different pitch. So this way, the original pitch here, and then being able to change the O note here, and then that would automatically remap it. And then once you have that saved, you could just simply save this particular drum map. So once you have that drum map set up, you could save that drum map, and that way every time that you reopen, you could have the the drum map go from, every C1 outputs a C#1, every D1 is a B3 or whatever particular mapping that you do. So use the in note and the out notes to remap. Okay, so question. I opened some old Cubase SX and 5 files. I get to contact 4 missing error. Is there any way to find out what samples VST I used in that project? Is the info stored somewhere in the CPR? So sometimes, and I haven't worked with Kontakt in a long time, but you may notice that as you open up an instrument, let me see if I have maybe an old project that I could recreate this with. I think I may have one. Let me just see. Let's see if I activate this project. Okay, so here it's looking for an instance of Groove Agent 1, which I don't have. So now that I do this, we could see often when we look here, we can see what the missing file is. And as we go to open it, you may, depending on how it's seen, you could see the preset name here that it's looking for. So a lot of times you may see it kind of referenced something similar to this, where you could actually see the name of the plugin, and you'll get like these little indications indicating that it's looking for this, but it can't find that plugin or that particular preset. I don't think there's any information to extract from like an XML file or anything like that. You could do that, but you could probably do some backward engineering just based on that. So I would try that. If you're using, a large, like a big multi-timbral setting within one instrument, it may be harder to do, but I would start there and see if you could recreate the missing files. Okay. All right. So, a question: at the final stage before mastering and mixdown, do you render and place your MIDI tracks? If so, why? What are the advantages? Thanks, Greg. I don't really find the need to render my MIDI tracks before a mixdown. I would just choose to do my export audio mixdown and then have the MIDI tracks automatically render with that. When I would use a render in place is if I needed to free up processing power in my computer. That's when I would choose to render my MIDI tracks, or if I was handing it off to someone else and I wanted to make sure that they had the correct sounds without having to have the same exact plugins and same exact presets and the program information loaded up. So if I was like in the middle stage of a production process and I was passing it off to someone to mix, I may choose to render in place just to make sure that they can't mess it up, or, just forget to include a file that wasn't playing back because they don't have that particular instrument. But I don't think you're going to have any difference in quality whether you pre-render the MIDI tracks or you just include them in the mixdown. So it's really just a personal preference. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. Can timings of precise arpeggiator notes from a synth with a local control off be randomized and sent back to the synth from Cubase in real time to achieve a more human feel? So let's see if we could kind of create this. Okay, let me just... Okay, so let's just do a new project. And I'll just do retrolog here really quickly. All right. All right, so let's say if I have an arpeggio going on here. So if the data is already inside of Cubase, so I will come over here and on this instrument track, I'm going to go to my MIDI inserts and I'll just have like an arpeggiator going. So let's say I want this to be, 16th notes. All right, so let's say I have this. I'm just going to record this information here. So let's say, as I'll just come over here, hit record. And all right, so let's say I'll come over here. Let's say I'll just quantize that and we'll listen to it. And let's say we'll just listen to it without the quantizing. All right, so let's say as we listen to this, and let's say the timing is very tight, and we have kind of our sequenced arpeggiator included. So we will look at this, and if I wanted to change the timing, one of the things you could do is apply a MIDI plugin called a quantizer, and just try adjusting the swing feel here. So as we play back, this will... So you could have different swing feels here. So that's what you could do. So I would, if you have the MIDI data here, you know, and it's residing inside of Cubase, I would just come right over here and just on the MIDI plugins, just open up a quantizer as a MIDI insert, and then you could adjust kind of your swing value there to get different feels. So even if it is very kind of rhythmically tight and maybe a bit sterile, you can just go over and be able to kind of change that feel using the quantizer plugin. Okay, so hi Greg, do you know the best way to export a Nuendo project into a Pro Tools session? Like, is there a way to export sends and group channel tracks that I missed? There's no real way, there's no translation between sends and group channels that you missed. If you wanted to, so where it's going to be recalled in the mix console. So the most full, you know, a very common way of doing that is just to export an AAF file. And then that would take all of your media, but that may not incorporate your different sends or effects. And if you wanted to get those carried over, I'll just open up kind of maybe a bigger project here. So I'll just open up one. And if you have different sends and different group effects, what you could also do is just do a batch export. So when we look at our particular project here, we could go to your file menu and do an export audio mixdown. And here we could choose to, okay, I want to take my output. We could choose multiple. And we could say, I want to take my group channels. I want to take my effects channels, my instrument tracks, my VST instruments, and my audio channels. And this will make separate independent audio files of all those. So you could render those files and get it carried over, but it's not going to, there's no way to say, this channel is going to this particular effect, pull up that effect and have the send at -3 dB and pan left or right. So, but you could render all the files using the batch export quite easily. Okay, so we have Hijack Sonar checking in from Central India. Good to see you on a hangout. Okay, so just seeing it looks like a question from Ace, but it looks like it's maybe the second half of a question. Let me just see. And sometimes if the questions are submitted in advance, it's they can disappear once the hangout starts. So you see, just reading a question from Ace, and it says parts, but it has some silence in between the wave parts. I want to put them into Groove Agent and just use the ones that I need. So Ace Amadeus, if you could maybe just, if you want to re-ask the first part of the question, maybe we could circle back to it quickly. I'll maybe check after the next question and see if maybe you could re-ask the whole question. I think maybe the first part got lost when we started the hangout. All right, good to see Robbie Bowling from Dallas. All right. So I'll try to circle back for Ace, but if you want to enter in the first part of the question, that'd be great. We can see if we could circle back. Okay. Okay, and I think this follow up to our Pro Tools Nuendo question says, sorry if you don't answer this kind of question, but what do you think has hindered Nuendo to get into post production sound studios and replace Pro Tools as an industry standard in film, TV sound? You know, there's a number of different things, you know, and we see a lot of success with Nuendo, especially in game audio. But you know, there's kind of a long history of workflows, and those people, when I go to many post places, you know, they're running computers are 12 years old and have kind of very outdated things. But you know, but it's easy to get files back and forth with AAF or OMF as well. Okay. Okay, so Nick, and he's asked this a couple times. He says he's still having a problem with slow loading a preset list on plugs, and also the favorites in the right bin. I've set it so it doesn't only scan when open. Any help? You know, have you tried? You know, try if you run it into like the diagnostic mode, like the safe start mode. Nick, when you hold down Alt Control, or I'm sorry, I know you're on Mac, so it's Command Option Shift, and see if you get the same exact behavior if you choose to temporarily disable the program preferences, and see if that changes anything, and that'd be helpful. I'm gonna see if Ace has maybe responded. Just sneak back, see if I see. Okay, so I don't see that. So I'm just kind of missing the first part of Ace's question. Okay, let me just scroll back. Okay. Okay, so we have Stockholm checking in. Okay, so afternoon, Greg, can you go over how to render Groove Agent MIDI track to individual drum tracks? I think we covered this in the last Hangout, so I think I have a file still prepared. So let me open this up. Okay, so here I have just a Groove Agent part. And we'll go ahead, just listen to it here. So I'm doing this in the acoustic agent. So we go to look at our kit here. And what I've done is I've taken each of the individual parts here, and I've taken, you know, the kick. So once we go into the mix console view, I could just go to the mixer and I could just take the kick here, and then we could route these to individual outputs. So at the top, and we have 32 stereo outs. So I can say, here's my kick is going to output 2, my snare output 3, output 4 for my hi-hats, and output 5 and 6 for overheads and rooms. So now that I have that done, I could come over here and just go to my render in place. So once these are going to their individual outs, I'll just choose to go to render in place. I'll just say, let's do our dry transfer channel settings. So now I'll hit render, and that will just take all of my different files here. So I'll have my kicks, my snares, hi-hat, and room and overhead mics all independently rendered. And if I was doing this in like a beat agent kit, I could do something very similar. So let's say if this is a beat agent kit, let's open this up and we go to edit the particular kit. So we could see, let me just mute the previous one here. So similar concept here. So this will be playing back kind of the individual sounds, and how I split these to multiple outputs is you could select your kick, click right here on the main page, snare, send it out to out 2. So you could send these to your different outputs just by clicking here. And again, you can have your 32 stereo outs, and the same exact concept. I'll come over here. Let's do a render in place. And I'll just use the same settings, and that will automatically just spit out kick, snare, hi-hat, and crash just based directly on there. So as we do this, you can now just play. And that'll be rendered. So those are some easy ways of just using kind of the render in place to get the different sounds in audio from Groove Agent. Okay, so let's okay. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. What is the best way to route Tractor into Cubase? I'm looking to go through Ableton using Rewire. Would I have any latency issues? Let me just take a look. I haven't run Tractor in like 20 years. I'm not sure if that runs as a VST instrument. Let me just take a quick look online. If it works as Rewire, you could run it as a Rewire device, and you won't have any. The latency will all be compensated for. Let me just see. I haven't. So if I'm not totally familiar with Tractor, but if it runs as a Rewire device, you could do that. So I don't think it runs as a VST instrument if memory serves, but maybe someone else could kind of chime in. But I see it says I'm looking at going through Ableton using Rewire. So if you could run it into Ableton, you could run Ableton through Rewire, and all the timing should be compensated for. But I haven't worked with Tractor in forever, so. Okay, let's go through some more questions. Okay, so a question from Millard. Greg, can you do a quick overview of how audio clips match the key to your project? Is it by chord track or root key or both or something else? So if you wanted audio to match, the key of your project, there's a couple ways to do it. One is if you have a chord track going on, let's add a chord track here. Okay, so let's just say we have super generic chord progression. All right, so and if we select an audio event here, you could go to the chords. So let's just come here and let's just select the track here. If you go to chords, you could tell it to automatically follow. So then this will work with monophonic audio automatically. So you could have it automatically follow the chords or the chords in scale. So as you look at as you have chord progressions, you may see the scales automatically show up here as well when you click on this icon. But you could also, if it's like a bass line, we could just choose to have root notes. You could have it be only within the chords or within the scale. So you could choose different aspects here to automatically, have it follow the chord track. I think using kind of the chord track is probably the best, most practical way of being able to work with that. So try that. And then for each track, you could have different settings. So like for a vocal, you may want it to follow chords and scales, but for a bass part, you may want it to just follow root notes of the chords. So each track could have its own different settings. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, greetings from OKC. I believe it's Oklahoma City. I haven't been there in a long time. Thanks for the great videos. You're welcome. Glad they're helpful. I would love a comparison of Cubase 10.5 and Nuendo future scoring producers here. So as of yesterday, there was a Nuendo update, and the Nuendo update brought all the Cubase 10.5 features directly into Nuendo. So there's people have been wanting that for a while. Some of the other things that Nuendo will offer that will be unique. So from a film scoring perspective, their workflows will be nearly identical. And as we open up a Nuendo here, you'll notice that it's going to look, very incredibly similar to Cubase. But some of the things that Nuendo is going to offer is going to be more extensive surround sound support. So if you're starting to compose, and let's say if you're working with audio tracks that are going beyond, so let's say I wanted to do more immersive surround, we could come over here and choose, let's do my audio connections. And let's say if I wanted to, Cubase will go up to 5.1, but directly inside of Nuendo, we could do not only that, but we could have, full Dolby Atmos support. So if we say, okay, I wanted a 714 bus, and I have this particular channel that's being routed out to that particular bus at this point, when we go to edit, we could have kind of the full surround panner. So you could have an actual Dolby Atmos. If you're doing a lot of stuff, also, we see a lot of people that will be doing different aspects of film. So if you're doing dialogue replacement, Nuendo will have a full ADR panels. If you're working with field recorders, there's, Nuendo will have full field recorder support. So if you have like a sound devices, there's also video cut detection. So if you wanted to have Nuendo automatically give you different markers based on different scenes, Nuendo is really, exceptional at that. There will be some additional sound design aspects. So if you wanted to go into some of the different tools that you could have, so when we go to, some more sound design stuff. So if you wanted to go even, like having a randomizer plugin. So if you're doing sound design and you have like one footstep and you wanted like, 20 variations of that one footstep, you could just run it through the randomizer plugin. So, there's a lot of things that we'll be doing, and also if you're doing game audio support, and if you're composing for video games, Here we could have, all of your game audio connects. So if you're using something like Audio Kinetics Wise, you'll have those a two-way communication with that. So, but, a lot of the scoring and, Cubase MIDI sequencing features, while they've been, Nuendo's been at the Cubase 10 level of feature sets. As of yesterday, as a free update, 10.3 celebrating the 20 years of Nuendo on the market. Those features were released free of charge to Nuendo users. So hopefully I'll give you kind of a sense. But your MIDI sequencing, scoring, virtual instruments will, all be the same. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, so I see a question. I would like to add just a drum fill from Groove Agent SE5. So let's say if we wanted to add a drum fill from Groove Agent SE5, there's a couple ways of doing that. So if we have it in just kind of the play mode here, so I'll just select my pattern and let's say we hit play. One of the things you could do is have an auto fill. So when you look at the patterns, you have intros, endings in red, and the blues are going to be different fills. So if you don't want to use the same drum fill every single time, just kind of the dead giveaway with drum programming. So if I'm here, one of the cool things you could do is also just set up kind of auto complexity. So it's not playing back the same pattern every single time. It's going like one or two levels of complexity up or down. Let me just slow the tempo down slightly here. But we could also say every 4 bars, play a random drum fill. So while it's doing this, it'll just randomly pick between one of the 4 drum fills for you. So that's an easy way of doing that. And while you have that done, you could also just set the input for this MIDI track from Groove Agent. So as I'm playing, I could just kind of hit play. And now everything that Groove Agent is randomizing here and doing our fills is being recorded as audio, or recorded as MIDI information rather, directly right back into the sequencer here. So if we wanted to just play that back. Now, if we wanted let's say this is our pattern and we wanted that repeated a bunch of times and then a fill, just drag the fill right onto the timeline and you can go back and just select the patterns and just make your own fills that way. So that's a couple of easy ways to add fills from Groove Agent SE5. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. How can I load up my Steinberg Model E virtual analog VST, which is VST2? I purchased it back around 2001. So yeah, I remember when that came out. It's still a great instrument. So that's a VST1 instrument, but I believe Steinberg actually updated it a couple years ago so that now you could run a VST3 version of it and run a 64-bit. So you could still run it. You can still run your VST2 plugins, but that was a 32-bit plugin. But there's kind of a free, I think if you just search for Steinberg Model E, so we had a lot of people wanted Model E and the virtual bass of the VB1 plugin. So if you have, if you wanted those 2 plugins, Steinberg redid them and it's just a free download. So just look for that. So it won't be the same exact version, but it'll be the same plugin, just running a more contemporary build for 64-bit. So it'll sound the same for you. So While your plugin from 19 years ago won't open because we don't support 32-bit plugins, you should, just download that free one, and all your projects will open up and work, and you'll have basically a free MIDI Moog. So, okay, so see a question. Can you give me a Cubase 11, please, sir? I'm from a poor family. Cubase 11 doesn't exist, so you could start saving up for it now if you wanted to. So the current version is Cubase 10.5. Okay, so question, how to compare my mix with a master track inside Cubase, ignoring the master bus effects. Maybe I should use control room, but does it make sense as I'm only using a Steinberg's UR22 with one stereo out? Yeah, you could definitely do this using control room. And it doesn't really matter how many physical outputs you have. So I'm running a UR24C, which is a very similar interface. So I'll show you how we could set up a using kind of a reference track using the control room. So let's take a look at it here. I have an example that we could use. So I think this project has kind of a built-in reference on it. So I will come to this particular project, and let's say I'm just going to EQ this very goofily. Okay, so let's say I'm playing back my project. And then this is, let's say this track is, say this is my reference track. All right, so I'll just do something really awful sounding like that. All right. So let's say I wanted to use this as my reference track. Now the problem with using reference tracks as an audio track generally is if you have processing on your master bus, such as like maybe a frequency EQ or other plugins, limiters, that you're running a master track through the same effects processing on your master bus. So that gets to be tricky to make that work effectively for you. So what could we do to have a track loaded into our project, but not have it go through our master effect? So I'm going to, we'll just come right over here. I'm going to route this track here to no bus. And then I'm going to make sure that we have a Q mix. I'll go to my audio connections, and let's go ahead and just we'll go to our control room, and I want to add a Q mix. All right, and we'll call this Q mix. We'll just call it a reference. Okay, so this track is not going to the master bus, but when we go to our Q sends, I'm going to activate this, and our third Q mix is reference. And at this point, what I could do is on my control room. So we'll be playing along. And then I'll just click on Q3 or Q mix 3. So this is now our Q mix here. So I could listen to my mix, and even though I only have 2 stereo outputs, I don't have the audio connections for the reference connected. So it's still gonna go through, and in the control room, that's the reference mix, and here's my mix. So you could listen to how this is the only thing that's going on in that Q mix. And now I could listen to my mix. And that's how you could set up, use a control room for doing a quick Q mix reference. So, and once you do that, it's just a great tool to have, because many clients would be make it sound like this, make it sound like this, and you could just have that and and immediately listen to it on the same monitoring. So again, even if you have one stereo out, it's no problem. Okay. Seeing people from England and Sierra Leone. Someone just starting off with Cubase 10 LE. That's great. Okay. So I see, Greg, can you tell me how to set up a generic remote to pan the selected channel? So probably a generic remote isn't the best method that I would do for that. A generic remote, we could think of it as being like more like very surgical for like I want to do panning on this particular track with this particular fader, but not kind of a generic thing. So if we go to your studio setup, what I would do is just set this up and you'll have track quick controls. And I would come over here and just learn and move kind of like your fader. And you could learn once you enable learn, if you have a knob with faders, you could go right over there. Now, as we do this, I could say, I wanted to take, particular tracks, and you could go to what you call your quick controls on every single track. And one of them you'll have is volume, pan, and then you have low cut, on and off, low cut frequency, high cut on and off, sends 1 and 2. So you could kind of set up this as a preset. So as I'm listening to a particular track, I could make this track louder, and then I could just do panning on this particular track as well. So I could just say, so let's just say, so once we have our quick controls configured here, we could just have these quick controls automatically work so that every time that you go to a different track, if you have this preset loaded up, that all you have to do now is just kind of come here and adjust the panning or volume on your different tracks. So say, while this is up. And then if you want to go down to your snare track, we could just say solo, just our snare. And then my second fader will always be so I could just use my faders here to control. So once again, kind of get them configured in your track quick controls. And this way, you could have these kind of 8 go-to parameters. And you say, if I want this to, and you could have these set up for your virtual instruments as well. So as soon as we come here, we could activate these, and you say, I just wanted to control sends 1 through 8 and just use your MIDI faders to automatically do that. Or now anytime that I select this preset, there's my volume pan, and I won't have to sit here and adjust like 100 little parameters every single time. So that's the fastest way to do that. Otherwise, if you set up a generic remote, which is good for certain things, you would have to set a particular fader and then choose an individual channel, as opposed to like, I always want this fader to be pan, I always want this one to be volume, etc. So I think that's the fastest way to do it. It's just set up your VST, your track quick controls, make sure you have your inputs and output ports defined here, and just learn. And you'll see that these will automatically just kind of carry right over. And now that you have these selected, you can just come right over here and adjust kind of your quick controls for every single, just load the preset, and then you could adjust as needed. And I think that's the fastest way. If you have just like a little 8 faders on your MIDI controller, to make that work for you. Okay. Okay, so question, how can I send Cubase click metronome sounds to outputs on my Mode 2 16A other than my main outputs? So when you go to, let's go to your transport menu. Let's go to metronome setup. Hang on, I think my son is knocking. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to get a movie started for my son. Bear with me just 1 minute. All right, sorry about the interruption there. So when we come over here, so just the question was how to send click metronome outputs other than your main outputs. So go to your metronome setup, and then you'll see audio click outputs, and then you could choose. So let me just, I'll add some here. I just have one connection, so I'll just add an output here. And at this point, we could just go to your transport, again, metronome setup, and you could choose your different outputs where you want the metronome to be routed to directly there. So that's how you could do it. So you can send it to any of your outputs. Okay. Okay, so a question on chord track. Is there any smart trick to chord 3 MIDI notes arrived simulates to an instrument track, so instead a little shifted in time? So if not, can the MIDI logical editor be used? You know, there's a couple. Let me just create just a quick MIDI part here. Show you some tips with this. So I'll just start with a chord track and then Okay, so I'm just going to add a quick instrument track here. We'll send it to. Okay, so now when I drag these chords over, and let me just glue these together. Okay, so is there any smart trick to chord 3 MIDI notes arrived simulates to an instrument track instead of a little shifted in time? So, one of the things, like if people have kind of block chords that you could do is if we use this tool here, the trim tool, you could just kind of come, you could do stuff like this. So you could say, I wanted these notes to start. So if you hold down like the Alt or Option key, you could just kind of grab, or if you wanted to do that for the end of notes, you could just kind of select like, where the notes start or end here. So if you hold down just the Alt or Option key, if you wanted to do like different little stutters, you could, like kind of space chords a little differently if you wanted to. So if you wanted to just kind of come there and stagger the starts or ends of different MIDI notes, you could do that for block chords. So I think, Jan, that might be what you're kind of getting at, but that's something to try. If not, just leave a comment and hopefully we can get to it before the end of the Hangout. All right, so we have Jason checking in from South Shields, England. That's great. Okay, so you see, due to current situation, Amazon is not delivering USB-E licenser. It shows unavailable, and I have Ableton Live 9 license, which I want to cross-grade to Cubase 10.5 Pro. What you can suggest me here? So I'm not sure what country you're in, but you could buy the e-licenser from any demo. You could always do just to get the crossgrade, you could order the crossgrade to Cubase 10.5 Pro without having the e-licenser. But most shops, I know, like in the United States, Amazon, a lot of people will buy their e-licensers from Amazon. Other dealers like Guitar Center or Sweetwater in the US, generally have in stock Sam Ash and other dealers like that, but I'm not sure exact what country you're in. But other dealers, it's a very common thing to have and for them to sell. And a lot of times, so I don't think there's anything, maybe Amazon might be temporarily out of stock. They're generally pretty good about that. But you could check with some other retailers, but you could still order the 10.5 Pro crossgrade without having the e-licenser, and then just put the license on the e-licenser when you get it. But check a local shop as well. I'm sure at these at this time they would love to have some business as well. So okay. Okay, question. Is there a way to select multiple tracks from the Control F window, find tracks? So let's take a look. Just see if I think this one project would have a number. Okay, so I'll just do a quick search and let's just say bass. So let me just see. See if there's a way to select both. So there isn't a way to do it, and the intention is really just to kind of find like, your one track and be able to kind of search for it that way. But if you wanted to, you might be able to set up a project logical editor preset. And this may be so let's say I have like a MIDI bass and an audio bass part here. So here I could probably set up a condition where we choose to select tracks that have the name bass in it. So let's see if I do that. So then it will select all the tracks. So you could have a project logical editor preset to kind of do that if you wanted it to select multiple tracks. It may not be faster. So you may want to, have, maybe save a preset with this blank. And then when you call up the preset, you could just type in the value. So if I just want to say, select all tracks that contain the name piano and then hit apply, at that point it could select all the tracks that contain a particular name. But that may not be faster, but I don't know of a way to select multiple events here. It's really kind of intended to allow you to select, and let me just try some different modifier keys. Yeah, so I don't think it's intended to do that, but you could try again a project logical editor preset. So if you go to your project menu to project logical editor, and then you could say, set up a condition here that's blank for the name field and just kind of type that in. And if you're doing that a lot, that may be faster, but not from the find tracks window that I know of. Okay, so I think it's from Jan. It's like, I've installed a new updated Cubase Pro 10.52, and now I have ideas how to improve some of the new functions. Is it possible to email my suggestions and ideas to someone Steinberg? So I think, Jan, you'd sent some suggestions like on, being able to abort while loading a project. So I have passed those on, but you could always send any ideas that you want to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I'd be happy to kind of communicate those as well. Okay, question. When and how do you need to use the delay compensation in the inspector? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the delay compensation. So let me just see if it's... So I think if it's this here, like the track delay. So I know some people will treat this if they know that there's a kind of like, maybe they're sending it out to a particular like they're sending an audio track out to another device, and then they realize that that's going to cause a delay, like going out into maybe like a metering device, and the metering device has a little bit of latency in it, that people will do a pre-delay here. I know some people, like I know my friend Michael Wagner is a well-known kind of hard rock engineer. He often will take tracks like kick tracks and move them a millisecond or two earlier so that they could have a different a different relationship with the compression, so that it's the compressor can be like super fast because like the attack can be dialed in a little bit more by just kind of shifting the track. So I think when you say the inspector, that this might be the track delay compensation. So that's why some people would use it there. So a lot of people would leave it alone, but generally it's not a problem. Okay, question. Help. My variaudio tab has disappeared from my editor. So let's take a look. So let's say if I wanted to come here and make sure that you're in the sample editor. And if you don't see kind of the variaudio tab, you could try to right click, and sometimes you could hide particular tabs. So if you don't see variaudio, and if you're in Cubase Pro or Nuendo, you could just right click and make sure that the variaudio tab is there. Sometimes, make sure that you double click and that you see the sample functions. And if you are in the track inspector, you may not see the variaudio. So you may have to just kind of double click on the event. So you can see the track or the editor. So make sure that you have the editor chosen here. And if you still see like, definition, audio warp, hit points, range, and you don't see the variaudio, try to just right click and make sure that you have the variaudio enabled and checked for view right there. Okay. Okay, so can you record a looped arrangement track live? So if you want it to, if you have it, it depends on, let's say, how you want to do it. So one of the methods that I would do, let me just see if I have an example of this. So let's say if I have this with a arranger track, we could have, let's say this part is our So I'll just do a quick rough arrangement here of my piece. Okay, and so here, if we wanted to play back, like let's say we're just here, and I wanted to actually play back kind of a different arrangement, I could just have it kind of jump around. So even though this is kind of a looped aspect, so now I'll come over here and we'll just activate the play order or the arranger track. So I'm just going to hit play here. Instead of moving on after it gets to the end of the A part, and now it's going to jump to the C section. And after it gets through this, so you could have it kind of do non-linear arrangements like that. And you could set up through generic remote to trigger these different arrangements in real time via MIDI. And then once you're kind of done with this, and while it's not necessarily like recording it live, but you could choose to flatten the chain, and that will automatically just kind of take those different aspects as if it was kind of recorded looped. Some plugins will allow you to kind of do different loop stuff live, but not globally on a project window. So. Okay. Okay, so question, how to extract chord information for the chord track from a MIDI file or MIDI track. I would like to generate simple lead sheets from that. So we'll open up an example to show this. So let's say if I want to come here, I look at my piano part. So I can select that particular part, go to my project menu, choose chord track. Let's create chord symbols. This will, if you don't have a chord track, will automatically add the chord track for you. And if you wanted to now look at your piano part, we could choose to go to your scores, to advanced layout, and we'll say show chord track. And now you could have that, or if you wanted to just have a blank part, I could add a MIDI track. And now if I wanted to just look at this particular part, like a blank part, and then again, I could just get in my advanced layout, and then you could just print out kind of a quick chord chart lead sheet for backing musicians to play along with very easily. All right. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. If you've learned something new, please feel free to give a thumbs up and to like the video. Okay, question. What is the advantage of using the drum map editor as opposed to playing it? Sorry, my timeline just jumped way ahead. Let me just find my place again. Okay. Okay, what is the advantage of using the drum map editor as opposed to playing it on a keyboard? Thanks. Some people love programming their drums straight in the drum editor. So, you know, it's a lot of people really prefer kind of just, you know, drawing in drum parts. Some people, you know, are very adept at playing and have great keyboard skills, but, you know, there's a lot of people that will just kind of start off, you know, and do a quick drum pattern. So let's just. Come over here. I will just create the drum map automatically from the instrument. You know, I think you may approach it slightly differently, kind of programming drums versus playing. So let's say if I wanted to just come here and I'll just put in like a quick one measure loop. So let's say we'll start off with our kick drum. So we just kind of hit play. And then just being able to just see if I have this. So, but being able to just kind of go in here and program you know, like, okay, I want my snare here. I want to be able to just draw in hi-hats. I wanted to be able to adjust the velocity very easily. I wanted to put in different rhythmic values. So let's say at this point, I wanted this to be, you know, eighth note triplets. You could just kind of paint in different rhythmic values and just kind of create beats in a very creative way within the drum editor. So some people, you know, coming from different ways of thinking, whether you want to play, and I know some people that are incredible players, like one of my friends, Rob Arbiter, who's worked with Stevie Wonder for a number of years, is probably like, you know, one of the best drummers I've ever heard, but it's 4 fingers on his left hand. And, you know, he could out drum almost any drummer, and he could play it in, but not everyone has the skills that he does for that. So, all right, so we'll move on. Okay, so question, can we arm multiple tracks at a time? So let's go over here. Let's say if we had 10 audio tracks, there's a couple ways you could do it. One is if you're working with folders. So let's say if I select all these tracks and I'll move them to selected new folder. So I could just come here and arm the folder, and all the tracks within the folder can be armed. If we go to our mix console, we could also link our different elements here. So we could also have the record enable as part of the link group. So if I just say, okay, this is all of our drums. Sorry about that. So we'll just call this drums. And I wanted to link volume and record enable. So now as soon as I come over here, I adjust the volume of 1. They'll all be linked. If I record enable 1, they'll all be linked as well. So you could do it as a permanently defined link group or put them all into a folder. And I think even if we get rid of the files here, so let's say if I wanted to add, let's say 5 audio tracks here. So let's say we'll add these tracks. And I think if I hold down maybe Alt Shift, I could enable quick link, and then I could link all those channels or monitor all those channels just by holding down Alt or Option plus Shift. So there's a couple different ways to record enable multiple tracks. Okay, so I see a question. I'm wanting to buy a CC121 controller, but no one seems to be carrying it anymore. Is it discontinued? It's not discontinued. It's been on the market about 12 years. So, but it's still a current product and still available. We still sell a lot of them here in the U.S. every month. So, but it's not discontinued. So I'm sure any dealer could do a special order on it for you. So. Okay, just go through, make sure. Okay, so let's go through. Thanks for all the great questions. Hello from St. Louis. Joined late, but would love to know how you created your arrangement track and if you're using markers to easily go to those markers. Okay, so let's go ahead and show you how we could do. So I'll activate this project. We'll show you how you could do kind of okay, so there's a couple ways that we could do different arrangement ideas. I generally will always, just as you know, for a long time, I will try to take have one marker track that's just arrangements, and this way I could see my intro, verse, chorus, and you could navigate quickly here. And I think you could just, so you could just navigate quickly, and there's keyboard shortcuts for the markers as well. So you could, someone's like, okay, let's go to the guitar solo, let's go to the bridge. I've also had projects where I'll have markers for each line of the vocal. So as you're doing vocal edits and the singer's like, yeah, do this line of da 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 da, and you could just look at the marker and say, okay, we could just navigate there. A lot of people like to see that so they can kind of see an idea of what the arrangement is going on. But if you wanted to go to the arranger track, here I could just use my pencil tool, and we could say, this is my intro, verse 1, chorus. We could say like a little transition, verse 2, chorus 2, bridge. And let me make the bridge longer here to match. And I wanted that. And then vamp. Now, if you wanted to, we could come right over here and just type in. So you could see these. So hold down the Alt or Option key, and now you could just call these, whatever you want. So, and sometimes this is helpful because, if you wanted to see, these could be a little larger. So if you want to make this, you can see verse, chorus, you could have like your verses and choruses the same color. So like really easily. Sometimes this is also helpful. I know people that just send the video feed so that as people are tracking, they could see the arrangement going. And then this is also just really great for being able to, I have to take this song and make it, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes for advertising. So you could take kind of one arrangement and chop it into different parts and just kind of drag and drop and change the order. And you could have multiple orders. So those are a couple different ways using either markers or the arranger track to kind of see your different arrangements that you've created. Okay. Okay, question, is there a way to get the other plugins in Nuendo in Cubase? Is WaveLab more plugins? So there will be some plugins that are going to be fixed for Nuendo. Like, Cubase won't offer like the post filter plugin, the randomizer plugin. WaveLab will have some specific plugins such as the restoration rig as well as master rig. And those will be kind of tied directly to the program. So they don't necessarily, once you have those programs, you can't necessarily get those plugins in Cubase per se. So they'll be kind of tied to the particular application that they come from. Okay, so question, can you help me out? I'm a bit confused about MIDI channel addresses. On my MIDI keyboard, fader says C9, but if I change it to MIDI Learning Cubase says C63. Why is this? So it's probably not MIDI channel. I assume it may be MIDI CC addresses. So... Okay, so usually, if check to make sure, so if I wanted to just look at my MIDI monitor plugin, so I'll just add an instrument track here quickly. And now that I have that, I can go to my MIDI inserts, and this is a handy tool, the MIDI monitor. Okay, so, and this will just kind of show you, like I have, like as I hit a note on my controller keyboard, just open this up here. Let me set my right input. So now as I hit a note, we'll see that note message. If I move a fader here, you could see like what particular message is going on. So whether you move like pitch bend or modulation wheel, you could see all of your different controller messages here as we adjust different parameters. So I would see, you know, if it's so if your MIDI, you know, check to make sure, you know, if yours says your MIDI keyboard fader says C9, you know, that it's not a fader, you know, it could be a knob, it could be a fader, it could be a different layer. But, you know, Cubase is going to show you exactly what actual MIDI information is coming in with the MIDI monitor plugin. So I would trust that versus what you may see on your MIDI controller, because that's what is being transmitted to Cubase. So check the MIDI monitor plugin, and that's just as a MIDI insert, and maybe that can guide you along to find a way. Okay, question. Just finished my orchestral template, but realized I forgot to bind main volume to a MIDI fader. Any way to fix this quickly? 500 tracks. So if it's just like your main volume here, you know, and just try, you know, so let's say if I, you know, wanted to, again, come here, let's go to my, you know, I will go to my quick control settings. So let's say my track control settings. Let me just learn this. So that's MIDI 40, 41. So as I select this particular channel, my input outputs, and just enable your quick controls here. You know, and now once you have that turned on in your template, you know, your volume for your master out or any particular track can just be done through your VST quick controls very easily. Okay, question, how to color tracks like you are. So one of the preferences that I have, so say I do a new project, and let's say I add a couple of audio tracks. I add 4 audio tracks. These will be colorized. So when you go to preferences, a lot of people don't have the colors automatically kind of working by default. So let's say if I wanted to go to, I think it's event display. Let's say, okay, so if you go to preferences under user interface, go to track and mix console channel colors. So a lot of times this will be set to like use default track color. So as I add a track, it'll just be gray. So I have it set to come over here and just say use previous track color +1. So now when I go to add tracks, it'll just automatically colorize the tracks for you. So, and it'll just kind of alternate. And you could, if you hit Alt or Option plus Shift S, you could see different, you know, your different track colors. You could see presets. So if you wanted to see, you know, more, you know, track color options, you could do that and hit apply. And then when you go to add track colors, you could just see them. So if you wanted more track color options, you could do that quite easily. And how I get them to show up in my mix console, again, is in the same area. So if you go to your Cubase preferences, you could choose to colorize the tracks, the folder tracks, or the mix console. So if I don't have the mix console tracks colorized, I could do that. Once I check that and then hit apply, then they'll automatically be colorized. So I kind of like to have colors created automatically so you don't have to go through and do it. So that's how I have my track colors set up. Okay, hello Greg, how can I delete all sample slots of Backbone at the same time? So let's give it a shot. Okay, let me load up preset here. I'm sure there's a way of doing it. Let me just see if I can. I don't see an obvious way of doing it, but I could do some more playing around with that, Angel, if you want. I'm sure there's a way of doing it. I'm still kind of learning it myself. But if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de to remind me for the hangout next Tuesday, I'd be happy to hopefully have an answer by then. Okay. Okay, so how would you set up for reamping? So I know a lot of people, when they go to track a guitar, is just to kind of, come right over here, record the guitar player's amp that that often a guitar player cherishes, that may not work so well in a recording situation. But, if you have a situation where guitar players bring in an amp that's more suited for live use than for studio use, but they can't bear to hear that. You may want to record the original guitar, and then, a lot of people run a DI signal and record both tracks simultaneously. So when you come here, you could just, record both tracks. So this would be like the guitar amp, and this is the DI of the guitar. And as you do this, you could just, if you have another output, what a lot of people do is just come right over here, go to your audio connections, send it to like a different output. Let's a mono output, feed that out. So you want to take the DI track, feed it to the mono output, send that to the guitar amp, and then, just record the signal again. I know some people also go into their audio connections and just create an external effects loop. You could do that as well, but often just, sending it to a discrete output, feeding it to the amp, and then just miking the signal again is an easy way of doing reamping. Okay, so just seeing kind of Ace's comment again. I think maybe Ace had got the first part of this question in before. So sometimes I've seen before the Hangout starts, if there's questions that were entered before, once it starts, some of those questions may disappear. Okay. But I don't mind if you repeat the question. I know you had your question about the Model E. But let's see. Okay, question. Hi, is there a way to export stem tracks using batch export through the mix bus processing? So let's say, all right, so let's say if I have I have my master chain here. So let's say if I wanted to come here and I wanted a compressor, I wanted to have, let's say frequency EQ. So let's say I have that going on, and let's run it through like a brick wall limiter. Okay, so if I have these on my master bus, okay, so we'll look at our inserts here. So we see our plugins in the master bus. So the question is there a way to export stem tracks using batch export through the mix bus processing? So if you wanted to just do like direct offline processing, so I could select this particular file, and then I could just drag all of my master effects processing. I could just drag it right on, and that will process that file. So that's kind of an easy way of taking your different, so if you have your stem tracks, so that's one way of doing it if you want to do it one by one. But also, if you have your groups that are rendered, so let's say this is a rendered group. So let's say maybe it's vocals. And maybe you have drum group, a vocal group, a guitar group, a bass group, whatever. So, and we've used the export. So let's say if we came over here and let me just add some group tracks. So when we have our tracks routed to it, we could do our export, audio mix down, and then we could just export our groups. We could place these into our existing project. So let's imagine these are our group tracks, and that we've exported. And now at this point, you could choose to just do a render in place. So, and when you do a render in place, if you want to include all of your Master Effects processing, you could do your render settings and just choose to do complete signal path. And that will render in place with all of the sends, inserts, EQs, but also the master effects. So if you render your stems first and then just take the stems, and then you probably won't have any EQs or effects processing on them because it will probably include what you've done. Just choose to do the complete signal path, and then the master effects will be applied into each group if that's what you want. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to use a USB joystick with Cubase? You can use a USB joystick for the surround panner. So I think once you actually kind of have everything set up in your studio connections, that once you have this set up, you could just hit the fire button, and then you could use the joystick for surround panning. So I know a lot of guys that have like a gaming joystick just for surround panning, because some companies have a patent on motorized joysticks for audio use. So that's an easy way to kind of get around with it. All right, so we see Paul from Lynchburg, Virginia. Good to see you on a Hangout again. Okay, so hi Greg, how come my computer was running fine before 10.52 and I could run multiple VSTs and many tracks, effects, etc. Now it's just like just one drum VST, a few tracks causes dropouts. Check out to, when you are running, a lot of people have found, I've found it to be more stable and be able to run more. But check to make sure that, when you start the program, hold down either Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift, and then try to see what happens if you actually get to the point where you choose to disable the current program preferences if you have the same actual performance as before. But I haven't experienced any performance differences on Mac or PC on my end. Okay, so I see question. When editing automation of volume on a track, I try typing in the values I want to change instead of dragging it in the grid, but at times it won't change as if it's locked. So why is that? So let's take a look. So one is make sure that, you have... make sure that you have read enabled on a particular track. But as you kind of come here, we could see, if I select the node, and sometimes it could be a little different. Like you may have to select from the bottom if you're in the combined mode. So if I wanted to just take those and be able to adjust the values here, or be able to kind of take, the value. So just from my info line. But if you don't have the record, if you don't have read turned on, it may kind of come off like it's locked. So make sure that read is turned on. And sometimes, if you're doing this and you approach it from the top and you have the range selected, you may not, and this is kind of, something to be aware of if you're working with the combine tool, maybe to select from the bottom, and that will select the actual events as opposed to the automation range from the top. So if I want to come here and move that automation, I could do that, but I don't necessarily have access to the points. So try selecting from the bottom up, and then you should be able to have access. So it's kind of a little bit of an editing change if you're using the combined mode to be aware of. Okay, so we have a question. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, and if you've learned a new tip or trick, please feel free to give a thumbs up. Okay. Okay, so Greg, I have mute automation on a track, but when I solo another track, that one goes into solo mode also, and I hear both. Is this a bug, or is it how it's supposed to work? One thing to be aware of, like if you have, let's say we have mute automation going on here. Let me just... Okay, so let's say if we're in Okay, so let's say while we're here, we're mute it. One thing that a lot of people miss, is because you could have solo work a couple of different ways where you could just kind of keep adding to solo tracks. But if you hold down Control or Command and click S, that will kind of override the solo and kind of do so instead of having multiple tracks that could be soloed at once, try just holding down Control or Command S, and that may act in a different solo mode that would automatically just solo that one selected track. So try that, and I think that may help with you. Okay, so I see a question on tube compressor. Let's take a quick look. So any possibility of adding auto attack to the tube compressor to make it more familiar to a 2A process? I will pass that on, but I think it's, I will pass that on as a feature request, but I don't think it does it now. Okay, question, any possibility of adding a dual mono option to all plugins would be a great feature in my opinion. So we've had that request, but what a lot of people do is if you're doing kind of a dual mono, and I know this is could be a workaround, but let's say if we have two different tube compressors and it's on a stereo track, that if you could go into the routing and choose different routing modes, so you could choose which ones are selected, so you could do it that way. I know it's not the most ideal solution for kind of a dual mono, and I know that our product planning team is aware of the people wanting to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at root key from the info line. I'll just start a new project with some MIDI loops here. Okay, so let's come over here. And I'll just find a quick keyboard part. Okay, so let's see. Let's see how this is. Probably horrifically awful. Paste together composition. All right, so sometimes you have tracks that will have, metadata, especially for different MIDI loops. Like we can see that this is going to be an F. And we have a root key here in G. So if I'm just going to switch this to F. Let's say if I switch to bass to F sharp. So now we could choose whether these are going to follow. So if I want the drums to be independent, but I want the bass to follow and the synth parts to follow. So we could set these two different elements to the root key and it could automatically just kind of follow. So let's say if I wanted to come here. So, and then at this point, if you wanted it to, you know, follow with like the transpose, I could say right at this point, let's transpose and we'll go up. So this way, these are kind of following the same overall key and working together. And now when you do this, these two will transpose up a major second. But the drums will choose to be independent. So it's really more for, you know, the root key is kind of, you know, a lot of working with MIDI stuff quickly to make sure that, you know, if you have different MIDI loops that they'll kind of comply. Okay, question, is the channel strip EQ comparison feature available in Elements? Also, how can you view RMS and other metering in Elements? I don't believe so, but I'll open up Elements here and just take a quick look. Yeah, so you're not going to have the channel EQ. And let's just see if there's the audio statistics really quickly. So, but if you wanted to check, so let's say I have an audio file on my timeline here. So it's how can you view RMS and other metering in Elements? So, you know, you have, you know, your basic metering here, but if you wanted to see what the RMS values were of a particular file, we could come over here to your statistics, and then you could see, you know, some of the information on a particular audio file, including the RMS metering. So, you know, you'll have more advanced options in the full Cubase. Okay, question, how can you use reference tracks in Elements? No control room. So I think if you want to do reference tracks, you might have to physically have maybe running two different stereo outs. If you have, so if you wanted to come here, we could choose, I'll go to my audio connections and let's choose to add another stereo out. So you have a stereo out and a stereo out 2. And let's say if this is your reference track, you could route that to stereo out 2 and route this to stereo out. And then, so that would be a way. It's not as ideal. So, but you know, that's why you kind of have the more advanced features in the Cubase Pro version. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, is it possible to have audio statistics after applying processes without rendering audio to another track? So you could, the audio statistic, if you wanted to see the values in the audio statistics, I think it would have to be an actual event that would need to be selected, that would have to be analyzed. You could see some, different options with metering, but not the full audio statistics, because the audio statistics would be needed to actually, it needs a file to analyze as opposed to just, having it monitored directly in. So, okay. Question, does adding a VPN to my internet connection interfere with Cubase Pro 10.5 Windows? There are answers on Steinberg's main sites forum, but they date back to 2018, Windows 8.1, etc. I run, for my work computer that I'm using now, I have a VPN that's kind of mandated by our corporate IT department, so I don't run into any problems. So I don't think it'll be an issue. And you see Siren Drums, you can ask as many questions as you want in a Hangout. That's fine. So you don't have to apologize. That's why we have these Hangouts. All right. So Ambient Dave is celebrated his 2-year anniversary with Cubase. So congratulations. All right. Okay, so we have a question. Is there any way to make the text smaller on the individual tracks on the mixer at the bottom where you have kick, snare, overhead for low tom, for example? I think that's going to be kind of a fixed size there. But let me just take a quick look. It could be in some preferences. Let me look here. Not sure if the text can be done independently. So I think that's going to be kind of a fixed size here. So I think that's a fixed size, but let me just hang out 1 second. Yeah, so I don't know of a way of doing that, but I could do some more research on it. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. This is probably a dumb question, but what is the advantage of using sends in and out instead of just having effects on individual track? Could you please explain sends in and out? Okay. So a lot of times, I see, this is something I see a lot of people kind of probably doing something, a little that I would consider, maybe not the best use of power. So I see a lot of people, let's say if I have drums going on here. Okay, so there's a lot of times when people I see want to run every single plugin as an insert, right? So let's say if I wanted the same reverb on all my drums, I see too many people, I think. There's no real right or wrong way of doing it, but they'll run the same reverb plugin as an insert on every single channel. And an insert effect is going to be dedicated to the particular channel. And a lot of times, you may want different sound elements to sound, like they're in the same room, especially with like a reverb or delay. There's often you want to use one reverb that multiple channels could access simultaneously. So instead of running, let's say, 11, instead of running 11 different reverbs here, if we use a send, we could take our send and send all these tracks to one reverb. And that often, when I hear a lot of mixes and people are using a different reverb for every single track and they wonder why their mix doesn't gel, it's because, they have different rooms. It's like recording a band where everyone was in a different room and trying to make it sound cohesive. So what I would do is just select all these tracks and I would add an effects channel to the selected channel. So let's say I want this to be my revelation. So I'll just come right over here. So now when we go to our sends, each of these tracks is going to be going directly to the revelation. So I have one instance of a plugin, but all my tracks could go to that particular instance. So I will come over here. I will make all these off. So just kind of come here. So as I wanted to tweak my drums, so let's say, okay, I want to take my kick. And this way, you could have varying amounts. So if you want less reverb on your snare, and you want to take your overheads and maybe make those a little bigger sounding. So this way you have one reverb that's on this effects return channel that we could now have all these tracks be sent to. Now, once it's on an effects channel, there's some other advantages as well. As I could go to my effects channel and I could EQ the reverb and cut out like the low end, get rid of mud. So I could do that for each individual track or just, do that for an effect send. And I could have this effect send go to my reverb. And let's say if I wanted to go to the reverb here as well, and then I could say I wanted to, put a little bit of, EQ, or I want to put a little bit of compression before the reverb. You have a lot of flexibility with your effect sends here to do that kind of thing. So even if you wanted to gate the reverb going through a compressor, you could just run a noise gate before it hits the reverb send. So those are some advantages. So, when I see people just running the same plugin as inserts, it's to me, it's kind of a waste of computers' resources, and it's just makes your workflow really slow. So I think those are some of the advantages of using effect sends. Okay. Okay, so I see a question or a comment, need MIDI in and fade out in Cubase. So a lot of times when we see people that want to take a MIDI part here and kind of do our fade handles. So something similar like this, where you say, okay, I just want to take my MIDI part and fade in, fade out. And if that's what you want to do, it's fine, but MIDI itself doesn't have a sound. So if we have a MIDI event, what you'd want to do is, let's say if I'm here, I could just double click. So let's say if I have a bunch of MIDI notes going on here, and this is our part, just select to do main volume, and then you could just grab, it's like a line tool, and then you could just draw in MIDI C, so you'll have MIDI, controllers. So you could just have your MIDI volume here, and that would send the MIDI messages directly in and do the fades. But it's not necessarily, the nature of MIDI itself isn't going to have like a fade handle. So if that's what you want, just come in here and just go into your MIDI main volume, or if you're using a virtual instrument, you could just automate it. But since the MIDI part itself doesn't have volume information or audio, if you're just looking at the MIDI data, most composers would prefer to draw in MIDI CCs. So, okay, let's move on. Okay, so it says I have Audia 5 from Ketron. How to sync with Cubase Pro 10 to get sound, and it's a drum machine. Also would like to sync. So if it's a drum machine, let me just see if I could Google it here, and just take a quick look at it. Sounds like it might be just a drum machine from description. Okay, so it looks like a Ranger keyboard. So how to sync with Cubase Pro 10 to get sound, and it's a drum machine. It also would like to sync. So, probably it's going to synchronize via MIDI clock or MIDI time code. So you could tell the hardware to receive or to look for its timing from an external source. Go to your transport menu, and you can go to your project synchronization setup. So if you wanted to send MIDI time code, so you could see there's probably two different ways that it would work. You could send MIDI time code or MIDI clock. So at this point, you could say, okay, I want to activate external sync. You could send destination. So you could say, I have, send MIDI clock destination. So you could say, okay, I want to send MIDI clock, and this is where my hardware is connected to. And then you hit play in Cubase, that will send MIDI clock out to the device, or so that's generally how drum machines work. Try just going to your transport to project synchronization and make sure that you have MIDI clock, and you could also have MIDI time code in a very similar situation. So if your device will respond to MIDI time code, when you hit play in Cubase, it will send MIDI time code down that MIDI port that's connected to your Ketron. And then if you tell that piece of hardware to, it's like, I want to look that it's going to look for external clock from a sequencer. And then at that point, when you hit play in Cubase, it'll send that to your hardware, and you should be all set. Okay. Okay, so hello from Norway. How do I get the grid to show signature in 1.3? I'm not sure if 1.3 is a valid signature, because usually you have what is the, like a quarter note is the bass, like in 4/4, but I'm not sure if there's a third note. So I don't think that's a valid time signature. I could be mistaken. So that's probably why you're not going to see the signature in 1.3. Generally it's going to be like 4/4, 2/4, 1/4, 6/8, 7/8, 5/4, but there's, and usually like that would be like the second number would indicate the rhythmic pulse, of what note gets to beat. And since there isn't there's a quarter note and an eighth note and a 16th note, a half note, you could do 2/2 like cut time, but I don't know of a third note as a rhythmic value. So that's probably why you don't see it coming up. All right. All right, so we have Sweden checking in. Okay. Okay, just okay, so we have Dave checking in from Kingston, New York. Thanks for many invaluable tips and tricks. I'm glad it's helpful. Okay. Okay, so clarify for question on chord track. Things from Jan. Smart trick to chord 3 MIDI notes not arrived simulates to an instrument track. You showed suggestion is okay, but I need higher precision of MIDI starting point. You could probably do, if you need more exact precision, and let's say if we have, all right, so let's say if I want to come here, so let's say if I wanted to do, let's take a little look at maybe like a logical editor preset. Okay, so let me just clear these here. So let's say we want to transform. And we'll say our context variable all right, so let's say I want to do something like this, or I could say, so, you could set up a logical editor preset, and you could probably do something kind of like this, like, okay, I want to take the select transform, try going for your filter target to context variable, and you could say, is equal to highest pitch, but you could also say number of voices within a chord, position within a chord. So let's say your note number in a chord. So let's say it's going to be the lowest is 0. And what I want to do is to take those values and move it over a beat. So I'll take these two here, and we could just say, and now we could say the lowest note in a chord, we could move over a specified amount, and you could go down to, PPQ or down to seconds, samples, frames that you want. So you could say, I want to take the lowest note within a chord, do this. I want to take and you could have the middle note within a chord. I want it to be somewhere in the center, the highest note to be left the same. You could store these different presets for each note within a chord, and for very specific values. And then if you wanted to create a macro that executed multiple conditions that you've created here for each of the notes within a chord, you could do that. So if you want to get like really precise, you could also do it through the logical editor as well. Okay. Okay, so we just had a question. Can you please explain how to use and what is the logical errors? I assume this is the logical editor. Okay, Ace corrected his typo right after. Sorry. So the logical editor is, conditional based editor. So think of like, when I first got into it, I remember I produced an album, and it wasn't at a great sounding room studio, but it was fine for getting work done. So we decided, it was a rock band, and we decided to use electronic drums with real cymbals. And it worked out great, except for we realized that every time that the drummer, and this is early electronic drums, like 1992, we realized that when the drummer went to his ride cymbal, that every time he hit the bell of his ride cymbal, it sent a false trigger to the tom pad below it. So every time he went to the bell, it would trigger a velocity note on the tom. And we didn't hear it during tracking, but during mixing, it's like, why is there a tom firing off every time that the cymbal is going on? And it's like 45 minutes of sequenced material. So, that's when I started using the logical editor, because what I could say is delete every note. My condition was I wanted to delete notes on F1 that had a velocity less than 50. So we set up here our filter target, and we could choose to say, okay, I want to take all of my notes. So we say type is equal to note, and then within different MIDI messages, and there's a part in the manual that will describe, like for a MIDI note message, value 1 is pitch, value 2 is down velocity, value 3 is release velocity. So I could say value 1 is going to be equal to like F1, which is the tom that was triggering, and that it had a velocity lower than 50. So instead of going through looking for every F1 that was a false trigger in the drums, I could just have Cubase go through the entire 45-minute sequence in a matter of seconds and delete every F1 that had a velocity less than 50. So it's these types of conditions that you could set up, like, I have a problem with this and I want to change it to this or get rid of it or transform it. That's when you'd want to experiment with the logical editor. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so question, the markers in the marker track, I think you showed, sorry, my timeline just jumped way ahead. Sorry about that. Okay, the markers in the marker track, I think you've shown before how to edit the names of them, but I don't remember how to edit marker names easily. All right, so take a look. All right, so I'm going to add a marker track here. So we already have one. So I will go ahead and just kind of drop some markers in different spots. Okay, so as we do this, the markers will increment and be named based on numbers. So I'll come here, let's add these. Okay, so on the marker track, so if we select a marker track, we can go to the edit, and this will open up kind of the marker editor. And here we can see the description. So you could just enter directly in the description field for each marker, and this is how you could name them. So now when you look at your markers, those will be your names. So you can do verse, chorus, solo, whatever you want. So again, just once you add the markers, click on the open marker window. And you could also do that, just Command or Control M. And then you could just, in the description field, type in the name for the markers that you want to see in the project window. Okay, so I see so I see question, did my disappearing variaudio question get answered? Yeah, we did that a bit earlier, so. Okay. And let's see, someone else mentioned maybe double clicking on the name. That doesn't do it. Yeah, so just open up, hit Control or Command M. Okay. Okay, so I see Ambient Dave learning lots. It's good. Okay, so we have greetings. I have a question regarding Cubase. I bought Steinberg's UR22 Mark II sound card. It's a great interface, and it came along with a lot of Cubase's programs and a download assistant. Which one should I use for production? I think the license that you have, you'll have a download access code, and that'll be for Cubase AI. And also, I believe you get a Cubasis LE for iPad. So, look for that as well. So if you have an iOS device, you could use that. So yeah, check it. That's the licensed version that comes with the UR22. Okay. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, when working with a project, there's a delay on some channels. Should it be compensated for in some way?" So as you record directly into Cubase, like as once the tracks are in Cubase and you start adding effects and EQs, these will all be compensated for. Where you run into issues with the delay can be when you're tracking. So when you go to track, a lot of people will come over here and have different effects on your master fader. So, a lot of people just by default, I think my son's movie is over. Let me get him a new movie. Just bear with me and then I'll get that going. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. We have a new movie and new series of shows. So, all right. So once the audio is in Cubase, it'll automatically be compensated for. And what a lot of people run into is running like a big compressor or a big plug-in, like a multi-band compressor on their master bus, and then tracking through it. So and also, if you're tracking through different plugins as you're monitoring on input, where it's actually, let's say, okay, I want to run like a big, my VST amp rack, and I'm running this, and we have all these, different plugins, and every time that we're doing plugins on input, that could be causing additional latency. So So make sure that if you're tracking, to try to, a lot of audio interfaces like the Steinberg UR series have built-in plugins so that you can't, so that you can monitor with compression and EQ, or print with compression, EQ, and guitar amps with zero latency, and monitor with reverb. And if you find that you're doing a tracking and you have like a lot of processing going on in your master fader, you may just want to come here and click on a constrained delay compensation, and that will bypass some of those kind of latency intensive plugins for tracking purposes. So, but Cubase will compensate, but it's just physics. If you're doing it on input, that would be able to, that could cause latency issues. All right, so let's move on. All right, so good to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. Is there anything in the works as far as a Cubase app to control things like transport panel remotely? So yeah, you could get the Cubase IC Pro. You could do that, plus fire off different key commands, shortcuts, and do your headphone cue mixes, stuff like that. What's the best practice for migrating a Cubase 8.5 project into Cubase 10.5? I'd hate to wreck it. So when you do that, there's really nothing special you have to do. It's the same file format since Cubase SX came out in 2002. So the last 18 years, it's using the same file format. So there's nothing to really do. Cubase 8.5 could work with, I think that was the last one that could still work with 32-bit like VST plugins. So if you have references to VST 30, if you have references to 32-bit plugins, that may not show up unless you have like the 64-bit version counterpart. But all you'd have to do is, once you import it, just save it and do a save as, and you're not going to do it. I don't think you'll have any problems with that. I see a comment, already a dislike. Who did it? Come on, own up. So we try to give good information. So, but anyway, but if you like what you're seeing so far, feel free to give a thumbs up to counter the one person. Maybe they didn't like an answer I gave or something. Who knows? So sometimes we have a thumbs down before the hangout even starts. So it's interesting. All right. Yeah, people want to take them to the Tower of London. All right. So it's fine. All right. Okay. Just going through. Okay, hi Greg. Just received the crossgrade email from Steinberg about Nuendo. I noticed that the crossgrade replaces the Cubase license. Will this mean losing out on certain Cubase only features? I think the only feature that you may lose out on is VST Transit. I don't think that's in Nuendo. I could be mistaken though. I haven't checked in Cubase or in Nuendo 10.3, but I think that would be the only thing. But right now, other than that, I believe they're a total parity. So, okay. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, so we have a question. Also, are Nuendo projects compatible with Cubase users? I work with several Cubase users and would hate to lose the ability to work with them on projects via file sharing. So when you go to open a project in Cubase or Nuendo, you would just, as the projects are compatible, Nuendo has a .npr extension. Cubase has a .cpr file. So when you go to open a project, let's say if I come over here, we could just choose to open up a Nuendo project just like we would Cubase projects. So they're basically interchangeable. So no worries about that. So Cubase can open Nuendo projects. Nuendo can open Cubase projects. Okay, question regarding on reamping. I have numerous USB connections I can use to get the guitar into Cubase. I want to be able to have them readily available and selectable in the I/O without switching audio hardware. So, just make sure that you're... Okay, so it says, I'm keeping the main audio hardware set. Surely it's not a lot to ask for to have other devices available all the time. One of the reasons that why you don't really see a lot of programs using multiple audio interfaces, you could do it a bit on a Mac with an aggregate device, and on Windows, some people use ASIO for all. And it seems like a simple thing. Oh, I'll just use this. But if you're coming from the perspective of a DAW, timing is critical. So when you have two different audio interfaces that are, have different clocks, let's say they're running, like if you have a UR22, that's 192,000 samples per second. And then if you have 3 or 4 devices, and if those get out of sync with each other because there's no way for the clocks to resolve, that's when you'd run into problems that could lead to different timing problems. So, if you want to be able to go out into the real world, it's best to have an audio interface with enough inputs and outputs so that you don't have to switch back and forth constantly. So that's kind of why that is kind of working the way it is. And if you kind of, those who've delved into trying to use multiple interfaces like on the PC side with, using ASIO for all, it kind of works and it kind of doesn't. And if you're doing it on an aggregate device on Mac, you realize that you have compounded latency. So that gets to be problematic as well. So, so those are some of the issues. So. Okay, so it says, hi there, Greg. It's great, thanks. How do I change the signature in a grid to show me 1/3 instead of 1/4? I've tried to change it, but it keeps jumping back to fourths. So again, and we kind of discussed this a little bit, if you wanted to set the grid to, if instead of to 1/4, you could set your grid, and at this point, instead of, you could do a half note triplet instead. So you could just come over here and do a half note triplet. But again, since there isn't a rhythmic value of a third note, but just try setting it to half note triplet, and I think that will do it. Okay. And here's an interesting comment. Forget Alexa Cube. If Steinberg had a Greg Hondo app, just my last name is Ondo, but I'd buy it. But nothing can replace the awesome human compassion and wisdom. Thank you. It's very kind to read. So very touching. Thanks. Okay, so we'll just kind of keep moving through. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. And if you've learned a new tip or trick, please feel free to give a thumbs up. Okay. Just reading through comments. Okay, so as you see a question, help needed. I need help with something annoying. After I export a mix down, the name of the tune changes to name one in the dialog box. So I think what you want to do is, when you go to export a song, we could just go to your export audio mixdown. And this field is intentionally active so that you could give it a name. So I know some people, tend to just, export audio mixdown and hit export and, don't give it a name and then have the same name over and over again. But just try typing in the name. We don't want to assume that the audio file is going to, be the name, but there are different naming schemes that you could have set up if that's what you want. So if you come over here, let's say you could have a naming scheme where you could choose to say, I just want the name of the file. And then, at that point, you could just have the name of the file automatically embedded directly in. So if you want to do that, but, just type in, make sure you type in the name. Some people think it should name it for you automatically. I would, as a software design thing, that's a dangerous precedent as well. So that's why that field is always kind of active. Okay. Okay. So, Okay. So I think we finally got the first part of Ace's question that was before. So it says there's a silence in between the violin recordings. I just want to remove this silence. I want to put them into Groove Agent, just use the ones I need. So if you have, let's just open up, I think I have a Groove Agent example here. So I will open up my instance of Groove Agent. So let's say, if we have silence on particular parts, like we could look at this. And if you want them in Groove Agent, just grab the range selection tool, and you may have to turn off snap, to be more accurate, but you could grab that range and just drop that range directly onto a pad. So I'll just come here. Then I could say, let's just grab this range, grab that range. So you could just kind of take different parts of the violin performance and just drag it and select a range and drag those into the pad. So thanks, Ace, for taking the time to reiterate the question. Sorry, I got lost there. Okay. Okay, just reading through comments. There's always great, wonderful discussions I'm like an hour behind on because I have to answer all these questions, but it's great. So I appreciate everyone's great, wonderful questions. Okay. Okay, so a question, is there a way to copy a MIDI clip from one instrument to another without the name of the first track on it? Okay, let's just create that. Okay, so let's say if I want to copy this, but you don't want to see the name on the copy track. Okay, so just, so question, is there a way to copy a MIDI clip from one instrument to another without the name of the first track on it? So if you copy it over, and if you wanted to rename it, so just kind of hold down Alt or Option. But if you come here and if you have the name of this, you could hold down Control or Command and just hit Enter. So if you double click on the name, hold down while the name field is still kind of active, hold down Command or Control and then Enter, and that will rename the event. So I don't know a way to have that automatically carry over. You could, if it really was annoying to you, you could in the event display choose not to have names, so that, you know, as a option. But I think holding down a Control or Command key and then being able to, rename it based on the current track is not a bad solution. But so try that. So question, I really like to get in touch with other Cubase composers and artists to exchange ideas and know-how. Are there a forum, Facebook group, or a WhatsApp group for that? I know there's lots of different Facebook groups. There's Cubase users, strictly Cubase, Cubase producers, Cubase 10 producers, advanced Cubase users, Cubase Academy. So there's a number of different Facebook groups, and they have kind of different flavors to them, but there's a lot of different Cubase groups there as well. So. Okay, question. I installed WaveLab Elements demo. Every time I export audio, it loads. Can I toggle this on or off? So when you go to your export audio mixdown, so go to your file menu to export audio mixdown, you'll see this little area here, and this may be closed for after export. And you could have that automatically open in WaveLab or WaveLab Elements. Switch that to do nothing. And then when you export, it shouldn't go to WaveLab. So once again, File, Export, Audio Mixdown, and under After Export, you may have to kind of open that little folder. It will probably say Open in WaveLab Elements. Just choose Do Nothing, and then that should solve it for you. Okay, so we have a question. I'm still a little lost between bus tracks and group tracks, and how to use bus tracks and why I've been using group tracks for pre-master. We could think of the terminology. We don't really have a distinction terminology wise between bus tracks and group tracks. We could have a distinction between group tracks and effects channel tracks, and they're very similar, except for like when we go to add an effects, when we go to add a group channel. So let's say, let me just jump back to another one of my projects here. And let me revert this. Sorry about that. My Cubase misbehaved there. All right, I'm just going to reboot my computer for a minute. Just bear with me. All right, I think we're going to be back here in just a second. Let me just check. Sorry about that. My Mac got all wigged out. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that it's okay on the feed here really quickly. All right, so we had a question about the groups and buses. All right, so sorry about that. All right, so thanks for your patience. Once again, I'm still a little lost between bus tracks and group tracks and how to use bus tracks and why I've been using group tracks for pre-master. So think of, groups. So we have groups and effects channel tracks, and a lot of people will kind of get those confused. So if I wanted to group all of these different channels together to do, something like so I'm going to take all my drums. I could right click and we could add a group channel to the selected channels. So as soon as I do this now, I could have one fader for all my drums. I could come over here and I could EQ all my drums together. As one collective entity. We could also do, now a lot of people may come over here and decide to add an insert effect. And this is what they may use for, effect send. So some people do that and it's virtually kind of the same thing. But we could think of groups as being more for summing, different aspects. And then if I wanted to do an effect send, I could do that here. And I could just add an effect send to the tracks. And at that point, we could go to our effect sends here. So, I know some programs have different terminology, but that's kind of the basic gist of, these will be very similar, but you could add the effect in the group channel send and have it do all the routing for you automatically as well. So they're like 98% the same. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's move on. Some other questions. Okay. Okay, so it says I write all my music in 1.3 and I auto-tune my mix bus. Am I doing it right? So, generally it's like auto-tuning on your mix bus may not be the best solution because that would auto-tune everything and not just a vocal. But if it works for you, that's fine. Okay, so I see a question. How do I use my sound packs? Sorry, we just had to jump way ahead. Just give me a second here. Okay, so how do I use my sound packs in MIDI the way I do in FL? So I'm not sure how you use it in FL, but you could come over here and have access to all of your different sounds that you want directly here. So, and if you wanted that on a particular track, just kind of drag and drop. If you wanted to have different MIDI loops, you could audition here. This would load a particular instrument, so you could audition different different instruments. And if you wanted that on a track, just kind of drag and drop. But any of your sound packs, you can come over here, and if you wanted to just go to your file browser, you could see kind of all of your, every folder that you have. And if you want to right click, you could just add it to your favorites, and then you could have immediate access to it as soon as you come here, and just say, go to your favorites folders and drag and drop from there. So again, just kind of, to do this, just kind of come over here, go to your file browser, and then all those files will be there. Okay. Says, hi, Greg. Thanks for all your great tutorials. How do I change the tempo of a finished song? The song fell apart time-wise. I tried to work with musical mode without success. So let's go ahead and let's say if I have this particular project here. So as you record audio into Cubase, if you record with a click, something like this, where it's kind of recorded roughly with a click, that tempo information, so we see 100 beats a minute here, will be embedded into the file. So that will be like the tempo stamp. And we can see that tempo stamp when we go into our pool window. So if we go to our media and choose to open pool window, so we could see that we have 100 beats per minute for all the audio files. And then we want to also place these into musical mode. So now whatever tempo I have, since we kind of know what the base origin tempo of the project was, I can now just kind of type in and say I want it to be 120. Or I want it to be 144. Or 96. Or 88 beats a minute. And if I wanted to have that, do tempo changes as well, I can come right over here. Let's add a tempo track. At this point, I could turn on the tempo track, so it's going to follow the tempo, and you could just kind of draw in tempo changes. Then it'll kind of start to speed up in a little bit here. It's kind of ramping up. So whatever tempo you just kind of draw in, it will just play back at that tempo. So that's kind of an easy way of doing it. So try that, and I think you could probably find a tempo for maybe where it fell apart at the end. So okay. All right, so we have people from Amsterdam checking in. All right. Okay. Okay, just reading through different comments. Okay, question, what's the difference between Cubase and Nuendo? Why have two products? There's going to be, Nuendo is going to be based for like specific workflows, if you're doing audio post-production, and some of those workflows, aren't necessarily aligned or they aren't necessarily going to be used by people doing kind of standard music production tasks. So someone that's doing standard music production may not need to do dialogue replacement for a film, like where you see the actors going in and re-recording all the dialogue lines. They may not need to do like field recorder import, where, if you have different field recordings where, maybe there's 8 channels and someone moved their head and they were caught on a different mic in the field, to be able to find the appropriate recording by the metadata in the files. Not every Cubase user is going to be doing stuff with, getting into Dolby Atmos mixing, or getting into Game Audio Connect, or having to, working with Audio Kinetic Wise, or being able to rename 10,000 events based on different criteria in a spreadsheet. So those features are still important for a lot of people doing kind of, more advanced work. So that's why those features are available in a program Nuendo, while we have Cubase is more kind of focused on music production. So a lot of times people go, oh, I would, it looks exactly the same because they don't use those features. But for the people that, use those features day in and day out, they're really essential workflow. So that's why there's kind of 2 different versions. So, all right. Okay, just going through. Okay, so question, hi, is there a way to assign a mouse wheel to jog functions? I don't think so. You could assign keyboard shortcuts for it, but not a mouse wheel. So if you want to do it with keyboard shortcuts, you could come over here to the edit and go to key command. So I know a lot of people will do that. So if you do like your shuttle play here under transport, you could do that, but not previous versions of Cubase used to have a big, huge kind of jog scrub wheel, and you could use the mouse to kind of control that, but that's not available anymore. So I don't know a way to do that. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, so Greg, could you please explain master bus and how that works? Really appreciate all. Thank you. Okay, so what the master bus is going to be using is, we could think of this as like when we're mixing. Just turn off some of my silly tempo changes here. As we're mixing, all these channels are going to be going and feeding a stereo, or like maybe a 5.1 or 22.2 output, our master output. So all these tracks are feeding into this particular channel. So people will want to make sure that the level of this channel is good. If you have this as your level and you do an export audio mix down, it's not going to be the loudest track. And once you're in your master bus, at this point we could apply an EQ to the overall mix. Or if I wanted to run like a dynamics processor, so if I want to put a brick wall limiter, let's put just maybe like an envelope shaper. So if I wanted to kind of bypass all this, so a lot of people will do further processing and kind of beef up the sound before exporting the mix on the master bus. So that's where all the channels finally end up here at the master bus, and then being able to process those in a way that's pleasing to you and works for your particular track. So, okay. All right, so we get to see Ambient Dave has to head off for work. All right, so let's keep moving on. So I see a question: can you do the drag and drop range thing in Groove Agent 4.2, or does it have to be Groove Agent 5? Steinberg is really nice, and they will make sure that it works in your Groove Agent 4 as well. So yeah, you could definitely use it in. You could do the drag, just to drag and drop the range in Groove Agent 4 as well. I think since Groove Agent 1, the very first time. So. And also seeing a great point from Terry as a preference about when we copied the track. If you come over here to preferences, let's go to editing. And then there's going to be part gets track names. So that, as soon as you copy, you could do that as a preference as well. So thanks, Terry, for pointing it out. That kind of slipped my mind. Appreciate that. Question: I still use my Houston controller. Is 10.5 compatible? Sure is. So, you know, even though Houston hasn't been manufactured in a long time, you could still come right over here, and your Steinberg Houston will still show up as your control surface. So you could just simply have that configured and still use your Houston. I have one as well, so still works after 20 years. So. Okay, so hello. What difference is there between 44.1 and 96 kilohertz? I don't understand. We could think of it as a sample rate. You know, if we were to think of like how many bits of information per second is the audio capturing. So if we were to think of it in terms of film, you know, we could think of like, you know, if we wanted to have like a video that looked very smooth, you know, generally it's going to be 30 frames per second, or now often it's going to be 60 frames per second. So that means that there's 60 individual pictures per second. So, and we could think of the sample rate as doing that as well, but capturing audio information. So we could have 44,100 samples or bits of information per second. So if you capture more information, that could be a higher resolution. So, and depending upon the material, you know, it could make a difference in the sound quality. So that's what this, think of the sample rate kind of like, you know, if you had like a still picture is one sample, and then being able to capture all that. So the higher sample rate you have, the more information that you have to work with. So it does take more information and more storage on your hard disk, but, you know, depending upon the music that you're recording, it may benefit greatly from that. All right. All right, so we have a question. Good day, Greg. Question. I view the Cubase stretched over two monitors. Is there a way of moving the location to the static cursor so it doesn't clash with my screen bezels? So let's say, you know, if we're doing the static cursor. So if you're not familiar with this, we could go to the playback options here and have a stationary cursor. So as we play, just kind of turn this down, and we get to the middle. So we see kind of our cursor moving. Now we could have the entire file move. And if you have this perfectly in the center of the project, you know, and you have it on two screens, it may be right at that point. Let me just see if that position is affected if we shut off like the right zone. So you may want to try, you know, one thing you could do is maybe to resize the window slightly, you know, but also having like the right zone active could change that as well. So you see when I'm playing it here and I have my right zone active, that position will change. So try seeing if you turn off the right zone, if that makes a difference. I know I had one friend who would just do his control room. So he would just kind of have his control room configured. So as soon as we're over here, he would go. So his control room was kind of configured to the right here. Let me just see if I can. And then he would always have the control room visible, and that would also kind of shift it over a little bit to the right. So try playing around with some of those settings and see if you keep or lose the right hand zone, if that makes a difference. Or try, if you use the control room, try having a separate control room mixer over to the right and see if that will kind of move the center of the playback head for you. Okay. Okay, just sorry, my okay, so you see Greg, stupid question. I have a track MIDI 001. I want to duplicate the track. Cubase adds D, so MIDI 001D. Is there any way to just make the track MIDI 002? This would save countless hours. So if you wanted to come here, you could do a project logical editor preset. So let's come over here and let's say name contains, let's say we want to transform, name contains and then what we want to do is, or I think, so let me just duplicate a particular track here. So I'll take the bass and let's duplicate the track. Okay, so now I see bass D. So what I want to do is okay, so let's see if I come here, we want to do Control capital D. Just try this here. Let's just say name. All right, so I'm going to put okay, so let's say if I wanted to come here, it's So that just did it there. So if I wanted to come here, so we had this, and we'll duplicate the track. So now we have this as base D. So we're going to say container type is equal to track, and under action target name, replace search string. So I did the parenthesis D, capital D parenthesis, and then I just said let's replace that with 002, hit apply, and then boom. So that's so hopefully that will now just so it says that would save you countless hours. So hopefully you can have countless hours back this weekend. So let me know if that makes sense. If not, all right. Okay, if a band you're recording do not wish to record to a click and follow the tempo, what would you suggest setting the tempo at? I would kind of probably what I would do for them. You know, you don't necessarily have to let them know that you're gonna do it. You know, it's always easier for the engineer, but there's ways around it. But what I would do is I go to my project menu, and there's a little beat calculator. So as they're playing, I would just tap here. I would choose tap tempo, and I would just tap along and get a sense of what the tempo is, and I would insert that at the tempo track start, and maybe start there. That way you're kind of in the ballpark. You could always do, if you have a multi-track recording, so I'll just show you like a quick multi-track recording. So it's not the end of the world if they're totally off, but I would maybe give it a head start, and they don't have to know that you're recording them. But if you do have a multi-track, let me just find a multi-track that's not recorded. All right, so say, you have just a multi-track, and it's not recorded to a click whatsoever. So here, I would just take maybe like the overheads and go to your project menu and do a tempo detection. And we'll go ahead and listen to it. Then it's made a tempo map of your existing project. I will just come here, find like where the downbeat is. And now that we've done that, we've just created the tempo map for the particular track automatically. So if the band doesn't record to a click track, you could go, oh, you guys are smart, I'm dumb. And just, by the time they're like, self-congratulating themselves for getting a take, you could have the tempo map created. So. Question, what would stop me from dragging a piece of audio into the sampler? Nothing. That's kind of one of the intended purposes of the sampler track is now you could come over here. Let's say I have a piece of audio, and I wanted to come here so let's say I have just like a one note. I could just drag this into my sampler track. That will add the sampler track, and then your playing music. So that's really the intention of the sampler track. Okay. Question, is it all right to sample your voice so we can use it in Cubase? Sure, why not? I guess these are all public domain. You just have to send me a copy. That's all. All right, good to see Grant Nicholas on. You don't have to worry if you show up late. So it's no problem. So okay, so I think we did the changing tempo of the tracks. Okay, so we have a question. What is reference mix? I want to hear it from you exactly. I've been doing some research on this, but I don't understand. A lot of time when you're working, we all have classic recordings that we love and really speak to us and that we aspire to emulate or to try to be in the same ballpark as. So, and it's pretty common that like many clients may come in and just say, I want to sound like this record, and the first thing you want to often say is like, well, you should learn how to play like that person. That would be helpful, or sing like them. And that's, but what you want to do is, but sometimes, what you could use is you want to load up the track and compare it to your mix. And that's what you could do with a reference track. So if you know that this sounds great in every car and everyone loves this particular song and this is what the client is really into, load that up as a reference track in Cubase. And as you're working, you could listen to the reference track to make sure that you're not like way too soft, or you don't have way too much low end or not enough high end. All those things, those are kind of what you could be used for reference tracks and why you'd want to use a reference track. Okay. 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 So we see a question. Hi, Greg. How can I convert the Arpeggi MIDI insert in Real MIDI event? So let's go ahead and open that up. All right, so let's say, all right, so I wanted to, so I'm going to load up a MIDI insert. And we'll just do a quick Arpeggi. All right, so I can see that when I go to record part in Cubase now, that I will just, let me just move this out of the way. So when I go to record, and I go to look at the part, we see that I've just held a chord down that triggered the arpeggio, and I could see that chord there. But if I actually wanted to record what the arpeggio is generating, once I come here, we could just see this little Arpeggi SX. And at that point, what I could do is, I'll just make this bigger so we could see it kind of in real time. So as we're recording, it's actually going to just do this whole sequence and record that. So now it's as if I had played in the sequence by itself. It's automatically captured that arpeggio. So that's how you can convert the Arpeggi MIDI insert into a real MIDI event. And before, if we had it done, let's say if I had just that particular chord done, and let's say if I come here and I just have the chord. just turn, and let's say if I just had the chord, I'll turn this off. And as we play, I'm just going to record a chord. So, and if I have that arpeggiator going on, you could go to your MIDI menu and go to Freeze MIDI Modifiers, and that will automatically turn the result of what the Apache SX is doing into actual MIDI data on the part. Okay, let's just scroll up again. Okay, sorry, my timeline jumped on me again. Okay, can we please get Shift Control Tab to switch between open VSTs and mixer editor windows? So let's say if I have my open. All right, so let's say. So it could depend, I think that's maybe a Windows combination, but I think if you just kind of go between your different Windows menus here, but I could play around with it when I'm on the PC side. Okay. All right. So we have a request from Jazz Dude. May I suggest you show loop mash effects to new users? This is a great little monster plugin. So let me see if I have. So if you're looking for some like performance tools, this is Loop Mash FX is pretty amazing for this. If you're doing this type of work. So I'll just go ahead and open up. And this just works as a plugin that we could play in real time via MIDI. So let's make sure I'm not killing everyone volume wise. So we could have different rhythmic pulses. So if you want to do and these could all be triggered via MIDI note. If you want to capture like a little phrase. If you want to just capture a little section, have it repeat over and over again. So instead of having to spend a lot of money on third-party plugins to try to accomplish that, you could just do it very quickly with Loop Mash FX. Okay, so let's move on. So it says, hi, I'm sorry that I'm late. Jay from New Haven, Connecticut. As a person preparing to move over to Nuendo, did you already talk about the Nuendo anniversary? I just saw the email. So yeah, we discussed it a couple times in the, directly in the Hangout. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to jump up to Nuendo. So I see Apache has been around since Cubase 1.0, right? Yeah, it's been around for a long time. So it's a great little arpeggiator MIDI plugin. Okay, so a question, I use AMD as processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, but sometimes I use too much plugins for audio and for audio's cracking. What would you recommend to relieve processor to avoid this? There's a lot of cracking in the sound. So when you want to, the first thing I would try is to raise the buffers of your audio interface. So generally you can lower the buffers like for tracking, and as you start mixing, raise the buffers. And we could do that by going to your studio menu to studio setup. And at this point, you'll go to select your audio interface and go to your control panel. And here you could see your different buffer sizes. So try raising the buffer, and that will make your computer have to work less hard. And that should free up a lot of processing power for you and give you more headroom. Okay. Okay, sorry, my timeline jumped one more time. Okay. Okay. So I see just a comment from Terry Dean. I still have 2 Ataris and a copy of Cubase 1.0 somewhere. I might look them up to see if there were 2 ARPs in 1.0. I think version 1, at least on the Atari, you had the interactive phrase synthesizer done by Werner Kracht, who's still at the company. I think he was like the 3rd or 4th employee. And that's probably the beast of all arpeggiators. So so if you go back to your Atari, play around with your IPS, the interactive phrase synthesizer. Okay, we see question. When you did the tempo detection and then found the downbeat, how did you align it? A shortcut key maybe? I just kind of dropped it in. So let's see if I still had the project open. So once I was here, I just listened for it, and then I had snap enabled, and the snap was to the bar, which is in 1/4. So once I'm here, all you have to do, I think, if I undo the last step, so we'll see that so as I go to play, so I just kind of, and after a while you kind of could see where the kicks are. So let's say I see where the kick is here. It's probably going to be right there as the downbeat. So I'll just kind of drop. I have snap turned on, and every beat has been dropped. And then I just click with the pencil tool. That's all you had to do. So nothing really special, just listening. Okay, so I see Greg have a well-deserved cup of tea from me when you finish the hangout. Your advice and info is much appreciated. Thank you. Appreciate that. We were going to we had a food truck that was coming to our neighborhood, but it got canceled. So We were going to do that, but we'll just try to relax and have a nice meal and then do the index tonight. So, okay, we had a couple people had sent questions in. Let me get to those before I forget. Okay, so we had a question, and we kind of touched a little bit on this last week with the Step Designer plugin. So it says, I'm having problems with the Step Designer. I need to automate it on and off, but I don't get it. I don't get to work with the automation MIDI insert one enable. So there's a link. Okay, so the only way I could switch the Step Designer off would be, if only I could switch the Step Designer on and off, it would be great. So let's say if I have a Step Designer here, and if you're not familiar with it, you could have basic sequences. So when you hit play, and you could have up to, I think, 200 different patterns. So in each of these patterns, so let's say we'll take this pattern. If I want to go to pattern 2, pattern 3, etc. So if I wanted to just kind of draw in and have different velocities or controllers. Now, as we do this, you could, and the question was like how to kind of automate this to turn it on and off at times. So if I hit C1, that will play the first pattern, C sharp 2 will play pattern 2, and eventually you run out of patterns. So I will just go ahead and sequence on this track. And as I do this, so let's say I'm just going to play pattern 1. Let's go to pattern 2, pattern 3, pattern 5. And then this is no pattern here when I hit G1. And then I hit E1. So as I kind of hit the different patterns. So instead of automating this particular plugin on and off, just hit a note. And if you just kind of keep going up in patterns, and if you want it to be a different note, just come right over here and just click reset. And then as you play, that will turn on and off the different patterns for you. So that will be on and off, and basically you trigger one of the patterns to be a blank pattern. So I think when we get right there, so then nothing plays and the Step Designer is not functioning. We hit another note. And you could just move the position of the note to accommodate that. If you want it to be earlier or later. Okay. So I think that should help with that. Okay, we had a little bit of question earlier, similar, but it's slightly different. Hello, Greg. Thank you for all the help you provide during the Hangouts. I have a question about a thing that got me stuck a bit. Is it possible to add an audio loop to the user library in Cubase? As for MIDI loops, it's very easy and efficient to work with them. However, it doesn't work with audio. I can copy my audio loops manually to the user folder, but it takes extra time. I wish I knew a better way. What I would do if you have a series of audio loops is, and we go to your loop area here, we go to your file browser. So if you know exactly where your loops are, navigate to them. And I would so let's say if I go to Documents, and let's say I go to Projects, and let's say if I go to my Hangouts folder, what I would do is right click and then add favorite. Okay. And give it a name. You can call it like my fave loops. Then when you go to your media bay, just go to your favorites, and then you could just see all of your favorite loops there. So once you kind of navigated in the file browser, just right click and add favorites, and then you could just go directly to your favorites and they'll all be retained there. Okay, this is also a follow-up from the last Hangout. Are there any key commands macros, one, for selecting, activating the project window, and two, selecting the first MIDI note automatically when you open a MIDI part via score or key editors? Okay, so let's come over here. So if you have a number of different windows open, let's say in your project, like let's say we have our beat designer, we have our, so we have all these different windows active, and we wanted to go back directly to our main project window. If you go to and key commands, there's a key command in here. So this is what I was kind of having a brain cramp with last week. So if you go to project, and then there's a bring to front. So now I think I've assigned this to, and you could assign your own key command. So I assigned Command Option F. So now I could just come right over here, hit Command Option F, and then this becomes my front window again. So try going to Edit, to Key Commands, Project, Bring to Front. All right. And the second question regarding this was selecting the first MIDI note automatically when you open a part via the score or key editor. So let's say if I'm here and I have just a note, let's say I'll just draw in a big note there. So I made a macro, and what this macro does is, I just go to your key commands and I called it select first MIDI note in editor. So I just did an edit open and then navigate right. So if I did this correct, I'm going to select this event. Let's trigger the macro. So it'll be select first MIDI note in editor. So that automatically launched the editor and selected the very first MIDI note. Okay. Okay, and we had a discussion last week about kind of like doing tape machine style monitoring and not functioning correctly when using ARA, and this is from Ed. And we had a little bit of email discussion about it. But found something kind of interesting with it. So I'm not sure if it's an ARA2 thing or and I'll pass it on to our team. But if it's also maybe more of it could be maybe kind of a Melodyne kind of thing. So what he'd ran into is when using an extension in Melodyne, I'm just going to use spectral layers here. And let's say I've done some different editing. And I don't want to write that into the file yet. But what I want to do is to come here and arm this track. And what he was running into every time that he would try to punch in or punch out while he had tape machine style monitoring enabled, the preference. Let's just try this quickly here, see if this makes a difference. So now I will come here and I could just kind of punch in. Okay, so I didn't check that earlier, but now I kind of get this same recording behavior. So I'll definitely pass that on, Ed, as a to development team with that. So I think I may have not had when I tested it earlier, I may not have had the record the tape machine style. So sorry about that. All right, let's go back to our live feed. We'll see how much time we have left. We'll do a couple more questions and then we'll move on. My son's been incredibly patient, so I'll have to go hang out with him and get some dinner before I start working on the Hangout. Okay, so we had a question. De-esser, can you tell me how to use it? And brick wall limiter. Okay, so so what a de-esser is going to do, a lot of times you may have different vocals, and I don't think I have a sibilant vocal, but we have like when people are talking and they have their S's aren't agreeing with the microphones, and you hear that a lot of time. That is what the de-esser is for. So when you kind of come over here, we could just, we'll go to our tools and choose a de-esser. And what that will allow you to do is to minimize those sibilant frequencies. And then you should be able to do that. And what a limiter is going to do is kind of boost the level to a very specific signal threshold so that you could kind of get your mix to sound a little bit louder. Okay, question. Should EQ come first or compression? It's really dependent upon the source material. So whatever sounds good is good. Don't necessarily worry about, which one comes first. It could vary depending upon the situation. Okay. Okay. Sorry, my timeline jumped one more time. Sorry. Okay, just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions again. If you learned something new, please feel free to give a thumbs up again. Okay, so it says, hi, whenever I'm recording a track in Cubase 5, it freezes, making constant hum sound, and Cubase shut down. What can I do? Check to see if you could raise your buffer and your audio interface. And, you may want to upgrade from your Cubase 5. It's probably 10, 12 years old. So depending on your computer, that could be a good place. Okay, so hi Greg, how can I render some drum tracks from Groove Agent or any other, some in mono and others in stereo? Is there any way to do it all at once? Thanks for your time. So, one thing that I often do is, you could do it through a number of different, is if you want to take a Groove Agent here, let me just... Okay, so I'm just going to add an instrument track, let's say a Groove Agent. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to add Okay, so I'm going to, add my stereo outputs. So I want to bus my kick to, let's say, the master, snare, hi-hat, and let's say my room and overheads. So let's say I want kick, snare, hi-hat, and mono, and room and overheads in stereo. So I'm going to add I'm going to add some group channels. So I'll keep this dialog box open. So let's add group channels. I want 3 mono, 2 stereo, and then I want to add 3 mono tracks and 2 stereo tracks. Okay, so now when I play back the audio here, okay, so I'm going to look at my mix console, and let me just hide my input channels. All right, so I have kick, snare, hi-hat. All right, so I have kick, snare, hi-hat. So I'm going to route this channel to group 1. So I will go to my snare, and this is group 2. My hi-hat to group 3. And let's say my overheads to group 4. And my room mic to group 5. Okay, so now we see our groups being populated, and I will come over here to my audio channels. And I want to set this audio channel as its input from group 1. And group 2, group 3, and let's make this our input. And we'll make this our input from group 4 and our input from group 5. So now just kind of go through, check my busing here. So let's say group 4, group 3. All right, so now while this is going on, I'm just going to come here and hit record. And the audio is now being sent to the groups. So the outputs from the instrument are being sent to groups. These groups, mono and stereo, are being sent to mono and stereo tracks. So now when we look at it, and we'll just go ahead and stop our groove agent, we can now see that we'll have mono and stereo tracks all together. So that's a very easy way. Once you have it kind of set up, then you should be in good shape for that. All right, so we've gone almost 4 hours. If we go like a couple more minutes, we will lose our closed captioning, automatic closed captioning, courtesy of YouTube. So and that helps people from different languages. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everyone for all their wonderful questions. I hope everyone learned something new, that you learned a new tip or trick. And if you like that, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing another hangout on Tuesday. It's a real thrill for me to see people from all over the world participating in the hangouts and learning new stuff. And I hope that everyone's taking this time, and people are spending more time at home to actually make sure that, we're learning new stuff in Cubase. And I really want everyone to please stay safe and healthy. And we'll see you on Tuesday's Hangout at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. Look for the index. Also next week, check out the Nuendo 20th anniversary promotion going on. Next week on the 17th, there's going to be another Spectral Layers Hangout, so check that out. But we'll be doing our Hangouts next week on Tuesday and Friday. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and please stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Goodbye.